Hello and a warm welcome to Federal special program Capital Beat. Reserve Bank of India barred Paytm Payments Banks Limited from accepting deposits or top-ups in any customer account, prepaid instruments, wallets and FASTags till February 29th, 2024, which means that the customers can add or withdraw money from the Paytm wallet till February 29th alone. Now, why did RBI put this lens on the Paytm Payments Bank? Now, what has come to light? We need to understand that. Now, there was a case where some 35 crore accounts were investigated, out of which 31 crore accounts were non-functional. There were thousands of accounts which didn't have a KYC. Then there was one particular incident of one PAN card which was linked to thousands of accounts. So that is why RBI had to issue this stern warning to the Paytm payments banks. Now, is this a very serious corporate fraud right under the nose of the Modi government? Will it derail the Digital India campaign? What's going to be the impact on the startup industry? And will this action by the RBI lead to any kind of financial disruption? Joining me now is a renowned economist of the country, Santosh Mehrotra. Thank you so much for joining. We have Giri Prakash, who's the business editor of the Federal. Thank you, Giri, so much. And let me begin with Santosh Mehrotra. So, will you say that this is a serious fraud which has happened right under the nose of the government?
Well, what we can certainly say is that it's a serious violation of the regulatory regime which is in place. Whether it's a fraud or not, that's a legal term that I'm not willing to foray into because I don't understand the law in this regard. But the more important point is that this is another case of outright corporate misgovernance. One. Two, it is a case of outright regulatory failure by the RBI as well as SEBI. I mean, what were RBI doing that after they had sent 4 notices between March of Feb of 2022 and now on the following phenomenon that I'll describe in a second, that and yet the Paytm continued to function in the way that they were still functioning. You see, the Paytm as a company, when it came into existence, was not given a license to become a payments bank. Now, people may not understand what a payments bank is, so let me just take a minute to explain that. That's a digression, but I will come back to the Paytm issue. You see, payment banks are like non-banking financial companies and not full banks. Payment banks simply give out money. They cannot take deposits. So they're like an NBFC, like Muthoot Financial or JIO Financial or whatever, so etc. They are not allowed to function as a full-fledged bank and take deposits. Now, there is another dimension to the online transactions. Any company that's an online transactions company like Paytm is required to link up with at least three banks so that the payments can be routed from those banks to Paytm and then to the vendor or wherever that online transaction is taking place. Now, the owner of Paytm, Vijay Shekhar Sharma, I understand his name is, projected himself as someone who was very close to the powers that be in this country. Took videos, took selfies along with the most powerful people in the country, and he congratulated the government, the Prime Minister, on the demonetization because it obviously helped his business, because it led to an increase in digital transactions in the country. Now, he used all these links to avoid joining up with three other banks. Rather, they created their own bank. Now, they created their own bank, which was a sister company of the Paytm online transactions platform. And they were taking deposits of up to 20,000 rupees. They were never given a license to be a bank, even a payments bank. So we've got a real problem. We've got a case of serious and of misgovernance on the corporate side, serious oversight on the part of RBI, because it's RBI which gives out these licenses. So you and I can well ask the question, what the hell were you doing? To this question as regulator. I am entitled as a citizen of this country who pays his taxes and expects that institutions of government, and these RBI is an institution of the government, they receive salaries out of my taxpayer money and your taxpayer money,
Right.
Nilu.
Right.
That's how they are in their job in the first place. They are
Allow me
meant
to
to
interrupt you.
serve us.
Allow me to interrupt you, Professor Mehrotra. So, does that mean that rather than giving a stern warning or taking this kind of an action where they have barred the payments till 29th February,
Correct.
should they have cancelled the license of Paytm Payments Banks?
They could, but obviously they've not even threatened that so far. I mean, if the Paytm as a company can ignore RBI's 4 notices, then they can get away with murder. Now, finally, of course, RBI has said that you will have to stop functioning as a payments bank from the end of this month. But the great point is, and this is apparently public information, that the shares of Paytm have dropped dramatically. And JIO Financial, which is the company owned by Mr. Mukesh Ambani, JIO Financial is waiting in the wings to buy them out, assuming a deal is to be struck. So, in other words, Mr. Vijay Shekhar Sharma, who's already a billionaire, can sell his company, which is obviously worth quite a lot, if he wanted, and if the right terms were struck with JIO, a potential buyer, and he will actually become an even bigger billionaire and start another business.
Right. But that brings me to the question, which I'll come to Giri, and then I'll again come back to you, Professor Mehrotra. Giri, that this does it look like an engineered crisis where everything is happening in tandem with the government? The government knows what has gone wrong with Paytm, and now they are allowing another company to bail out Paytm. Now, is this an engineered crisis? Does it look like a premeditated planning or a design, if I may call it?
It's well, I don't know about premeditated, Nilu, but what is clear
Right.
is
Yeah.
that Vijay Shekhar Sharma was getting away with violations after violations, and he thought that he could get away, and it was obvious that he was getting away. So this is a case of, if not explicit collusion, then certainly implicit collusion, unfortunately. Because all the news is that Mr. Sharma and Paytm made massive payments into the Prime Minister's relief fund. If I know that case, and that is not audited. And that's never been audited. A lot of people have objected to that from the very beginning, when the country already has a Prime Minister's relief fund for such matters. Then this relief fund was created by the government for at the time of COVID. So this whole business is full of it stinks. The whole business stinks.
Right. All right. Now, if I'll come to Giri, Giri, I really want you to explain to the viewers, because a huge chunk of people have been using digital payments, and especially Paytm. It had almost become like a habit, for the people to make their payments through phones or through their Paytm wallets. Now, will this crisis lead to any kind of a financial disruption? Because what I have read across many sections of the media, that there are CAs, there are bankers who've been asking people to switch over from Paytm to other payment digital apps. Then Vijay Shekhar Sharma has also told his employees that don't worry about the layoffs. Uh, I'm trying to sort out things with RBI and things will be all right. So that is the kind of message which is going out. So is it going to lead to some kind of a financial disruption? Giri. Yeah.
The way I look at it is that see, UPI came into existence, the Unified Payments Interface came into existence in 2016, and it was developed by the National Payments Corporation of India, along with the Reserve Bank of India and several other banks. Now, this is something that we can be very proud of. Very few other countries have. I doubt if other countries have it or not at all, but we showcase it every time a foreign dignitary comes down to India. Now, having said that, there are going to be issues with UPI, and it's like a work in progress. There will be people who will take advantage of it. There will be people who might mismanage. Some of them may not know how to run this business properly, and there are others, like for example, a Google Pay or a few others. Phone Pay, for example. There will always be issues with them, but then uh, in some ways, if I had to look at it in a very positive manner, it's good that this has happened. It's a good lesson for the rest of the payment options that we have. And RBI should actually see to it that, I mean, it's very clear that RBI has given enough warnings to Paytm management and they have not adhered to it. And let's not go into the fact that whether it is engineered or not, but I personally feel that this was bound to happen. It could be with Paytm or it could be with anyone else, and it has happened. And the RBI should now be very strict about it. It's a huge lesson for the other UPI platforms.
But why was RBI so quiet all this while? And now suddenly we came to know that 31st of January they've sent out this, taken this stern action of putting a bar on the payments. Why were they quiet all this while? And also the fact that the Paytm had launched its IPO on 8th November 2021. Now, if all that misgovernance was happening, how did SEBI also allow that IPO to be launched? That's also another question.
I think see it gave the Paytm a long rope because look at it. Paytm is more like like Bisleri. It's become a common noun. Everyone wants clean water. They say give Bisleri, right? So
Right.
so many transactions happening. There are companies which give away salaries via Paytm. It's not the case with say a GPay or a phone pay. Paytm actually was like that. So therefore, one has to look at it from that angle, and they gave them enough rope, long rope, and then they came down on this. And but then please understand, not much is lost out of this. Okay, you can still do those kind of transactions today. In fact, somebody was doing a transaction on Paytm itself. There are things that have been barred, and hopefully the RBI will see to it that they adhere to it. Whether Geo buys it or somebody else buys it is left to them, because we actually even today do not know how deep is the crisis. In
Right.
spite of what Mr. Sharma keeps talking about and keeps telling his employees and all that, we actually do not know how deep the
No,
crisis
but
is.
when you
What
say,
is
Giri, that the crisis is very deep, we do not know to what extent the crisis is. What does
Mhm.
that mean? That are there more skeletons which will tumble out? What does that mean? I'll come to you, Professor Mehrotra. Yeah. Oh, all
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Let me.
You see, the thing is, the big problem with Paytm is that its operations are deeply interlinked with its payment bank. So it is difficult to say who does what. So let us look at the payment Paytm, Paytm Payments Bank. What are the things that the products that they offer? They offer wallets, UPI, deposit accounts. All these things are deeply interlinked, and that's the reason why it is snowballed into a huge crisis. Now these have to be untangled, and only then would anybody else be interested in taking over? And these have to be untangled. And if it really gets untangled, then why would Sharma go and sell it off?
Right. So, Professor Mehrotra, does it lead to a situation where the options with the payment banks will be limited now? Say, for example, not to multiple services, maybe just a few services now would be allowed. How do you see the situation unfolding then?
Nilu, let's just be very clear about this. There's something called a payments bank, which is the equivalent of an NBFC,
Right.
a non-banking financial company. Now, you have proper banks, you have payment banks, and you have platform companies like Paytm, which are undertaking transactions. Now, a Paytm type company, which is undertaking online transactions on your and my behalf, also receives money into its wallet, right? These people are so clever that they opened up they opened a bank, a payments bank. The possibility of creating a payments bank came into existence about a dozen years or so ago. It was an interesting innovation, but most of those who have put in deposits there, for most of those people, there is no know your own customer information with Paytm, the bank. In other words, that itself was a violation. How did they get away with this? Problem number one, that means there is already a systemic risk here. Why am I talking about a systemic risk? It is not as अच्छा है, हो गया, बड़ी दिक्कत, अभी दिक्कत है, कोई बात नहीं, इस बार सीख लेंगे, अगली बार ठीक चल जाएगा. Let me try and tell you what the context is. The banking system has been in a crisis with very high NPAs in this country. And when the banks were not able to recover the money, or rather the IBA process went haywire, right? IBC process went haywire. The NCLT could not deliver. The government decided that the banks will simply write off some 15 to 16 lakh crores of debt. That's people's money being written off. That's not a small matter. And when the government does that, it uses your and my taxpayer money to recapitalize the banks, public sector banks. In other words, it uses your and my taxpayer money in order to make the banks, public sector banks, which have been losing money, look profitable so that the government begins to make profit. On whose back? On your and my back. Point one. Point two. When my money is being used to recapitalize banks which have not done their due diligence, that means that I am not being provided health services, education services, police services of the order of the quality that I'm entitled to as a citizen of this country, for which I'm paying taxes. Point two. Point three. We know that one round of NBFC financial crises already happened about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, on top of the twin balance sheet problem that I've just been talking about, where banks' loans were not being repaid by corporates, by big corporates. On top of that, when the banks were not lending to anyone because they had too much NPAs, the government encouraged them to lend to NBFCs. And NBFCs lent to small borrowers and to MFIs. Okay, microfinance institutions. What happened as a result of that? Do you remember? Most people do not remember these things. What happened was that a series of these NBFCs collapsed. So we got, and who were the NBFCs lending to? To the construction sector, to developers, land developers. And because demand was not rising for construction and for developing real estate, those NBFCs began to not the construction companies didn't repay the NBFCs, and the NBFCs collapsed one after another. Now what are we seeing? The payments banks are NBFCs. Please try and understand the systemic risk that we are talking about here. ये मामूली बात नहीं है कि अच्छा हो गया, कोई बात नहीं है, अगली बार कोई सुधार लेंगे. This could be the beginning of a crisis. वो बात अलग है कि जियो फाइनेंशियल बैठा हुआ है, वो खरीद लेगा.
Right.
So we don't know how deep the crisis is. Of course, he has no choice but to mollify and to satisfy his workers, because his workers are Paytm workers. Is he going to be able to satisfy the Paytm Bank's workers also?
Obviously.
These are the real issues.
Right.
That's the real issue.
Those are real issues which, of course, raise very, very serious questions. Now, Giri, you wanted to add something when Professor Mehrotra was talking? Yes.
Yeah. So let us look at the impact that Paytm will have. First of all, it will lose its wallet business, which has been the company's core proposition for years. And if I remember it right, when it introduced its wallet business, it was extremely, criticized. In fact, the regulator was told that they should withdraw the license for that, which RBI did not. It will obviously lose control of its UPI payment stack. Its payments which are offered at the lowest failure rate for the industry. It also loses its deposit franchise, which is completely different from what a PhonePe or a Razorpay does. And it can no longer issue FASTags. And that was one big thing for them, the National Common Mobility Cards. And the ones which are stuck on the cars, screens. So all these things are something that they were very unique to Paytm compared with the rest of them. And as Professor Mehrotra said, we actually do not know how deep the crisis is. I really hope that RBI either sets up a committee or sees to it that one actually really goes into each and every operation of Paytm and comes out with a report. Only then we'll get to know how bad the scenario is.
Right.
But as far as today is concerned, Paytm is in a big mess.
Right. One more question, Giri, and then I'll go for the concluding remarks to Professor Mehrotra. Giri, today Congress had held a press conference also. Supriya Shinate made it into a big political issue that, ED had been sitting quietly and, ED is unleashed, for the opposition. But here you have someone who is very close to the Prime Minister. And she also brought out pictures of how selfies were taken between Prime Minister and Vijay Shekhar Sharma. And she also referred to one Uttarakhand rally where Prime Minister, on his film which was made, he said that Paytm was paying a cashback of 200 rupees. All that she mentioned during the press conference. Now, does this issue really have the same potential of becoming a political issue, just as Adani became a political issue?
Nilu, I really can't say because, it's only things are coming out now. We don't know how deep the crisis is. As far as the Adani is concerned, there was this, whistleblower who came up with a report. Only then we got to know that these are the issues and then we could gauge how deep the problem was. As of now, everything has been triggered off because of the RBI's directive.
Right.
So there's been no independent kind of inquiry that has happened.
Right.
Now it's up to the RBI to actually tell the world that how deep the crisis is. Obviously, the opposition will take advantage of it, and anybody would in this circumstances. Having said that, I must also tell you that Paytm was always a big question mark for everybody around.
Right.
It was always there. It's just that the RBI, decided that enough is enough, and they issued those directives.
Right.
But they should go 2 or 3 steps more and tell the investors, tell the public how deep the crisis is, because it's a huge lesson for everybody around. We really need to know how deep the crisis is, how much of money has been lost, what's the kind of fraud that has happened, and how it will impact the fintech industry.
Right. All right. So, concluding comments, Professor Mehrotra, what would you like to say towards the end to this payment banks crisis which has unfolded? What kind of learning lessons are there for the corporate world, for the politicians, for the investors, and also for the users as well?
Well, one lesson for opposition parties is that they should remain better educated than they are so far on these matters in advance in order to hold the regulators' feet to the fire,
Right.
hold the government's feet to the fire, and hold the regulators' feet to the fire. This requires competent, knowledgeable people to be following, tracking the accounts of companies like this, whether they are in violation of regulations or not. Point two, although this should be a wake-up call to the regulator, I do not believe that this is going to be a wake-up call because unfortunately, as very rightly it has been repeating, Paytm has been given a long rope and a long rope for a long time. How can this continue for so long without Paytm's owners being brought to book? Time and again in our country, the weaknesses of corporate governance have been revealed. Adani is only the latest case, and clearly every effort is being made by the Supreme Court committee as well as SEBI to brush this whole set of matters under the carpet, and it is not going anywhere. It's a government by the corporates, for the corporates, of the corporates. That's the problem.
I have just one more thing to say.
Yes, yes,
Hello.
indeed. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Go ahead.
it's not good enough for the RBI to issue a directive and keep quiet. They should actually come out with a report on how deep the fraud was. They can't just, and then if they just give a directive and get on with life,
True.
that's not done. The opposition should actually go ahead and ask the RBI to come out with a full report, how deep the problem is. Only then will this entire thing get completed. They can't just
Right.
leave it like
Right. So, from what you're saying, that the crisis is how big we do not know. Maybe the crisis is deeper than what we are thinking, and maybe who knows? It could be just the tip of the iceberg as far as the digital payments are concerned, payment banks are concerned. But as Giri said, that yes, RBI needs to bring out a report as to what really went wrong, and this is for the people to ask, the opposition to ask. Thank you so much, Professor Mehrotra. Giri, thank you so much for joining. And one appeal to the viewers who are watching this discussion, subscribe to our channel, send us your feedback, and stay tuned to the Federal.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.